Hey everyone, Hadassah Damian here from Ride Free Fearless Money, and I am in my capacity today as your local nerd, social historian, political scientist, money demystifier, behavioral analyst, to talk about debt. But we're going to talk about why sometimes debt is something you would pick strategically. So often we talk about debt as this thing to be avoided, or this burden, or the albatross around our necks. But that's not always how everyone thinks about debt. Sometimes we can think about debt as a strategic choice, right? So in the first version of debt, you might be thinking it's like buy now, pay later consumer behavior. But the way we're going to think about debt today and learn about it is this whole I'm going to use your money instead of mine, because that makes sense in the long term. And that's called leverage. You're doing the same thing, but you have two key differences. Number one, you have purpose. And number two, you've done some math to basically assess if I use your money, the bank or the lender, instead of mine, I could make some money or do something else, achieve a purpose with the other money that I keep behind, that I hold on to. And that's called liquidity, another important concept. So here's an example to start to make this a little concrete. Say you, like me, are about to go buy a car, and you're saying to yourself, should I, if I can, buy this car in cash, or should I take out a loan for this car? Depending on the cost of the car that you're looking at and how much money you have in the bank, it might not be a choice. You might be only considering taking out a loan for the car to cover the difference between the cash you have and the cost of the vehicle. But say that you are, like me, potentially able to buy the car in cash. Why might you take a loan anyway? Purpose and math. One might look at the availability of the loan and say, if I borrow the money, what's the financial impact? You look at the interest rate and you say, I'm able to borrow money for relatively cheaply right now. I was able to get a 4% loan, which means that instead of putting all my money into this car right now during a pandemic, recession, uprising, when things are just a little bit uncertain, I could stay liquid, keep more cash on hand in case there's any other surprises, because genuinely, who knows, and pay 4% to borrow the money. I had a purpose. I wanted to stay liquid, and I did some math. 4% was my interest rate. Now, what's another concept I'm going to give you besides leverage, someone else's money, and liquidity, I want to keep some cash on hand, is what I like to call the 5% rule. Some people think of it as 6%, but either way, if you can borrow money for less than 5 or 6%, it tends to be a decent decision because you're able to do other things with the money that you keep on hand that, if you are making certain choices like investing, you can make more money with the cash you keep on hand than servicing the debt. All right, and so that is this 5% rule, which is the math that you would apply if you were trying to make some decisions about debt. Now, the 5% rule isn't always going to work. Say, for the example of student loans. For some of you who have student loans from a while ago, you might have 2, 3, 4% interest rates on your student loans. And if you're listening to this in 2020, you might actually not have to pay your student loans at all, and there might not be interest accruing on them. So it might be a really easy decision for you to say, I'm going to pause on paying that debt because I've done some math and I'm not accruing any interest on this right now, so I can use that money for a different purpose. But you also might have student loans that are 5.5%, 6.75%. Maybe if you have graduate student loans, and you might be saying, this just crosses over that 5% rule. Looks like I should prioritize paying those down. And so the one thing that I would encourage you to think about in terms of debt is, is there something else that you might consider paying down first? Because student loans while gnarly and burdensome, are also more manageable than other types of debt, just in terms of the programs that are in place, like income-based repayment and things like that, in terms of how much you might pay for them. And so here's another example. Getting a house. So these days, especially right now, if you're listening to this in the middle of 2020, interest rates are low. You can get a mortgage for a primary property, that's one that you live in, for somewhere between like 3.5%, maybe 4%, which is considered to be low. If you're getting a mortgage at 3%, that's considered to be historically low. Really, really affordable. And that goes back to this 5% rule, because if you're only paying 3% to borrow money, spending your money instead of mine, bank, you could hypothetically also have some money left over to put into your work retirement plan, or a retirement plan you set up for yourself, or some other investment that you put together, and make more than 3% or 4% on that money. So mortgages are considered to be, and they're like the sort of very like normalized, accessible, good debt that a lot of people take on strategically because, well, most of us can't buy a house in cash. And even for those who can, it can still be more strategic to leverage someone else's money, stay liquid, keep some of your cash behind, borrow for the cost of the property, and do something else with the cash that you've kept because you've done some math. This is the main concept behind investment properties, like rental real estate, along with not necessarily paying off your mortgage immediately, but putting money to your retirement plan. So there's a couple key reasons why people would not necessarily pay off all their debt immediately. Although if you've gotten to a point where you're debating between paying off, an affordable student loan and your house, then you're going to use math and say which one has a higher interest rate. If you're at the point where you're debating between paying off a affordable car loan and your affordable mortgage, you're probably in a pretty decent position. Which is great. Congratulations. You've gotten somewhere that probably feels less stressful. But for the rest of y'all who are like trying to think through a bunch of different debt, I wanted to give you these concepts of liquidity and leverage and the 5% rule to let you know that debt is not always bad. It's something we can strategically decide to use to make more money with our money. Over and out for now.